Today we're going to talk about something called your mesolimbic pathway. This is more commonly known as the dopamine reward pathway or the dopamine reward system. As you can imagine, this is the system that allows you to feel rewarded when something good happens. In order to understand this a little bit better and understand what's going on inside of you when you are feeling rewarded and how that can attribute to things like addiction, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the areas of the brain that are involved and what their functions are. And I'm going to make it as easy to understand and follow as I possibly can. What I want you to focus on is not all the complicated words, and you don't need to know the parts of your brain and the names. What I want you to focus on is the functions that are involved, because all of those things will have an impact on everything in your life. While we're talking about these functions, also take a second to think about addiction and how all of these functions, when they're negatively impacted by a drug, which you're going to see, how would those functions create the behaviors that you know to be associated with addiction? So the process initiates when your brain encounters a rewarding stimulus. So whether it's an external object or an internal thought. So essentially, the activation of that mesolimbic system, it tells us to repeat what just happened in order to feel the rewarding sensation. So the dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it is responsible for us feeling things like reward and pleasure, euphoria, your fine motor skills, compulsions, and perseveration, which is the involuntary repetition of a thought or a behavior. Okay, so this is your brain, and these are the structures that are involved in your dopamine reward system or your mesolimbic pathway. So these, as I mentioned, are the parts of the brain that are going to create a rewarding feeling in your body, and I'm going to tell you how that happens. So that's the process starts here in your ventral tegmental area, your VTA. Now, this guy is responsible for creating your dopamine. Okay, so this is where you're going to create that dopamine. Do you remember what I said it was for? Feeling rewarded, feeling euphoria, happy, all of that stuff. Okay, the next thing that happens is when you produce dopamine, it comes over to your nucleus accumbens. This guy here, this is the one that is going to send the dopamine into your receptors and send it throughout your neurons. It's going to go all throughout your body and tell your body how to react and how to feel. And basically, it's going to tell your body to feel rewarded. This amygdala, this is the next guy involved. This guy here, it's going to assign emotion to that reward. So think of a time when you were out somewhere or you walked into your mom's home or something like that, and you smelled something that smelled like your grandma's cooking, and it just brought some feeling of calm and just that wow, like what I wouldn't give for that right now, or whatever, like I'm so excited for this. That is the amygdala working. It's connecting it to an emotion of excitement and remembering things, which is going to be a part of the hippocampus. This is the one that's going to create all of those memories associated with it. So not only are you creating now memories, you're creating emotions. And so when you feel reward, so when you experience a stimulus and you experience again and again and again, what's going to happen is that reward is going to be bumped up. You're going to increase your dopamine, how much you're producing. You're going to have more of that being sent out to your body, so you're going to feel even more rewarded, and you're going to seek that because that's a really wonderful feeling. This prefrontal cortex I'm going to get a little bit more into. Okay, so a little on the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex are responsible for things like your high functioning, your thinking, your planning, your motivation, your impulses, all of those kinds of things. So the activation of this pathway is going to bring about a conscious experience. So you're going to be very conscious that this reward, this is what's happening when I do this or experience this. I am going to feel this sensation. So the more, like, the stronger that pleasurable response, like I said, the nucleus accumbens is going to release more of that into your system, and you're going to feel that even stronger. And it's going to end up having that reinforced throughout other structures of the brain, which I mentioned, and they're going to be responsible for memory and behavior. This is how things like addiction happen and turn into habits, which I'm going to go a little more into, but let me just show you one of the other neurotransmitters involved here. Take a look at your dopamine pathway and all of those functions, just to remind yourself what all I said your dopamine system and reward system involves. Now we're also going to look over here, and we're going to look at this serotonin pathway. Now this is going to impact your mood, memory processing, sleep, and cognition. So just as this is going to help with reward, it's also going to negatively impact somebody with addiction. And I'm going to get a little bit into that. But let's just remind you again, your memory is happening in your hippocampus. Your memory is going to be negatively impacted. Sleep is going to be negatively impacted. The way you think, because it ends up in your frontal cortex, that is going to be affected. So think of all of these things being negatively impacted, and that being beyond somebody's control with addiction. Okay, what I want to show you here is what it looks like when you're responding and reacting to a regular stimuli, a healthy stimuli, something that we are naturally ingrained to want to go back to for survival purposes. That'd be food. You need food to survive. Music is going to be something that, we use as an outlet, and sex we use for reproduction. All of those things we want to go back for. So that is what we call your synaptic gap. And this is how much dopamine, these little orange guys, we're just, as an example, would be in your system. Down here you have receptors. I'm going to show you what this all is. But what would happen is, as your dopamine is released, it gets brought down into this gap, and it'll bind to receptors, and it'll just kind of bind in, bounce off, bind in. And then it goes through something called, it's an uptake channel. So what's going to happen is it's basically taking it out and pulling it back in. And this is going to stabilize, and that's going to make sure that you know the difference between stimuli that have increased amount of dopamines, things that are more exciting for you, more rewarding. This over here is what it looks like with a drug. So as you can see, there's tons more. You have way more dopamine in there sending rewarding feelings to your body, which means more of your receptors are going to be filled, and your body is going to be more overwhelmed by that feeling. I'm going to show you just on another slide what exactly is happening here. Okay, so once again, this is a synaptic gap that is affected by cocaine. So what's happening is that transmitting neuron is releasing your dopamine into your synaptic gap, and it's going to start binding to your receptors. And like I said, it's going to send it through, and because you have more of your dopamine being released, the effect is going to intensify throughout your body again, so that you will want to repeat that more frequently. What is happening, though, is that cocaine, the drug itself, blocks that dopamine from being taken back up into that neuron. So now your gap is flooding. It takes time for this to break away. So not only are you getting a more rewarding effect, you are now getting that effect, and it's going to last you longer. So what starts happening now is your body wants that rewarding feeling, but nothing that's in a natural state, nothing that normally would give us that rewarding feeling, will give us that much stimulation. So those things are no longer affecting you, and the more times you do the drug, the more this is going to continue affecting you, because the drugs damage your system, your memory, everything starts to become impaired. So serotonin, as I mentioned, that's associated with feelings of happiness. It's your memory process, sleep, and cognition. Due to the drugs, they will affect serotonin levels to the point where like everyday activities are just no longer pleasurable. This results in a lot of low mood, and it's going to make you want the drugs more, because that's the only thing that is giving you the stimulus that is meeting your physical and emotional needs. So instead of being able to meet those now yourself with everyday activities, you become reliant on the drug for that to happen. So the more that happens, as I said, the more the effect becomes intense. But then what happens over time? It becomes a habit. And after it becomes a habit, it becomes an addiction. And now this person is going to seek that, because that's the only thing that will make them feel better. Generally, somebody with addictions is trying to hide trauma. So what better to bring them reward when nothing else will bring them reward than a drug? Remember, nothing that normally would work works anymore. So it wasn't a choice that this person had this happen inside of them. It wasn't a choice that their body began to feel more rewarded. And it wasn't a choice that that person stopped being able to feel normally. And this is why addiction is a disease. So it's something really to think about. And it's something to recognize that the cognition is compromised. We look at that frontal lobe again, and we see that's where our judgment comes from. That's where we make decisions, like we rationalize all of those things. So now when you look at somebody with this knowledge, knowing that this feedback loop is happening in their brain, and knowing that over time tolerances are built, just like anything else, and we want a little extra stimulation, which to them cannot be fulfilled any other way than increasing the amount that they're using. So now think about somebody you know in your life, or somebody you've seen depicted on TV, or the way that you've heard somebody with addictions talked about. Do you think about them differently?